Welcome to the Freedom Club podcast, where we discover the fight for freedom, fulfillment, passion, and purpose. Your host is Curt Gallup certified strengths coach, an agency founder who is dedicated to coaching individuals seeking to level up their life and their businesses. The Freedom Club is about unlocking your talents, turning them into strengths, and crushing your objectives. You can learn more at curtmercadante.com. Welcome to the Freedom Club.
This is the Freedom Club podcast. I'm your host, Curt Mercadante. It is Thursday, March 22nd, which means it's time for the Thursday interview segment. Of course, every Monday is the Monday Motivator segment, in which I deliver a short burst of motivation to help you kick your week off on the right foot. Every Thursday is the interview segment, in which I interview a business leader or some other all-around interesting person. And today, my friends, we have just that in the form of Heather Younger. Now, Heather and I have been connected on LinkedIn for many months now, but I had the great fortune of meeting her in person last month in Denver at the No Longer Virtual Conference. She's as wonderful in person as she is online. She's a consultant, a facilitator, and author of the best-selling book, The 7 Intuitive Laws of Employee Loyalty. And folks, I am passionate about employee engagement, and that's what her book is all about. I was fortunate to have her as a guest. You're going to hear the interview today on the Freedom Club podcast. My friends, right now I bring you my interview with Heather Younger. So welcome everyone to the Freedom Club podcast. It's Thursday, which of course means it's time for the Thursday interview segment, in which I interview a business leader or some other all-around interesting person. And we have an interesting person today, Heather Younger, author, best-selling author of the 7 Intuitive Laws of Employee Loyalty. Heather, how are you doing today?
I'm doing great.
Yeah, I get tongue-tied from time to time. So I don't edit it out so everyone can see how fallible I really am. But thank you for being here. I really appreciate it.
Excited to be here.
Awesome. Great. So, Heather and I have been connected on LinkedIn for many months and finally got to meet a few weeks ago at a great event called No Longer Virtual. It was in Denver, and got my personally signed copy of the 7 Intuitive Laws. And so we're going to talk about it today because I think it's a fascinating book. But first, Heather, I would like to ask you a question that I ask all of my guests. It is the Freedom Club. So my question to you is, what does the word freedom mean to you?
It partly means what I'm doing right now, which is plotting my own time. I don't have to punch a clock. No one's telling me what it is I need to be doing right now. I get to choose to be here with you and my favorite people. So freedom is just being able to do things when I want to do it. Also, just not feeling pressure to do the things I don't want to do. So it's kind of like being able to do the things I want to do and then not being pressured to do the things I don't want to do. And I felt like in certain ways when I was working for someone else that I had to do the things they want to do and I had to go down the roads they wanted to go. And now I get to choose my own. So it's kind of exciting.
That's great. And when a lot of people think of freedom, and a lot of the people I have on here, like you and I, work from home offices, or Mike Johnson, who I had on recently, he lives in Cody, Wyoming, where he's out feeding the deer while he's reading his books. And actually, I think he had a picture of a deer with your book, didn't he?
Yeah, he did. So I loved it.
Teaching the deer about employee loyalty. But you don't have to work on your own. And I talk to people, I'm sure you talk to people all the time, who they're in a 9-to-5. It's possible to have a sense of freedom if you are in a quote 9-to-5 working for someone else, but there's a lot of people who don't have that freedom. And I think a lot of it is related. They have that Monday morning anxiety, getting up to work, that tightness in their chest because they know after 9 o'clock when they go into the office, they have a loss of sense of control. And I've just heard some horrible horror stories. I'm sure you have as well, of managers who suck the sense of freedom out of their employees, right? Which is why I thought your book was so interesting.
Yes. It's very unfortunate for that to happen. And they push a lot of people away. So
I had a week, probably 2 or 3 weeks ago, where I had talked to 3 people, like 3 days in a row. And the first person I talked to gave me a horror story of her job or her former job. Then the next day, someone gave me a horror story that was ramped up a little bit. Like it went from just someone who was callous, then it went up to toxic. And then the next day it was like physical abuse or attempted physical abuse. It was like by the end of this week, someone will have been like in the hospital. I mean, and so these stories, you hear about them. I never realized, as you know, when you put out content and you do podcasts and you do videos, you have incoming messages from people. And one of the things that really just, I guess, shocks me, and maybe I'm naive, is the amount of stories I get from people who have managers who are range from the callous to the toxic to the physically abusive.
Wow. And I haven't seen the physically abusive side. I mean, I hope I never have to see or hear about that. I'll probably get very angry and go a little left field myself.
Yeah.
I don't like that at all. There's that defender in me. So
yeah. And the person I talked to kind of laughed it off. I'm like, I really think this is like a serious thing. Like you need to get out of there right now. Mm-hmm. But your book isn't meant for the employee. It's meant for the employer as sort of a roadmap. And what was the impetus? What inspired you to write the book?
Well, it's interesting. I had been writing about in this space for probably a year and a half or 2 years. Some of the content from my writing actually went into the book. And I think it was one of those things that needed to happen. It was like, listen, guys, particularly managers of teams, leaders, you don't get it. Please get it. Listen, read this. I didn't make it very thick so you could actually take it in, right? I want you to understand the words that are coming from their mouths to my ears. And so what basically, I wanted to say all the stuff I had heard over the years, and of course, being an employee and myself and feeling a lot of the things that people have communicated to me as well, it just needed to get out there. And it's not like it's not out there at all now, but some of the stories and some of the just texture that's there was a little bit unique, and I just needed to put it out there. So
yeah.
So
the book is a bestseller. What do you think? I mean, not mechanically, like how did you promote it? Although that's a very interesting story in and of itself. But what do you think the secret sauce is that really fueled it to make it a bestseller and to have people really take it in and enjoy it and read it and have great feedback with you?
To be honest, I think the cover. So you have, I think the cover was a big one because most business books don't quite look like this, where it's like the beautiful hues of kind of a rainbow in a way. Right? You'd be wondering what that book's about. So I think the cover was a big part of it. I did some crowdsourcing. So I used folks on Facebook and on LinkedIn to help me decide multiple different options, which cover would be the best. And I end up combining it. I think it has a look of Covey as well too. And so when you combine kind of those two things, I think it was just the way it looked. And then the promotion portion of it. I mean, I had the right people helping with promotion, and it was just like, in a big way. We made sure the first 2 weeks, it was all about that book.
Got it.
Like, I see you everywhere. And it's like, well, I'm paying for that to happen. That's purposeful.
What's the feedback been like? I mean, in some cases, and I've been part of facilitations where you go in and sometimes managers can get their back up, or you can read it and, they can feel defensive. Have you had a mix, or most people, or is it basically if you're a manager who's going to take the time to read it, you're already conditioned to be someone who's looking to better yourself?
The latter.
Yeah.
What my hope was, I'm sure you could imagine though, was that the employees would actually see it, get their hands on it. People who didn't have the management or the authority within the workplace, get their hands on it, and then somehow either gift it, drop it off, in a secretive way to their boss so they could actually see it. And so, and one of the things that happened is I had one of my current clients wanted me to, I was doing some work for them in the coaching space. I was doing some work for them in in the facilitation space. And she wanted me to come and do a book event. And so they bought like 100 books and for the people that would be attending this book event. And so when you get that type of thing happening, it's good because then it may get in the hands of people who really need to read it, who would ordinarily not go seek it out. So that's kind of my hope, is that more people will buy it in bulk, give it to people who don't look at it normally. And then those people will get, even if they just take one thing away from it, right? They change in just one way, I'll feel that I've been successful.
Yeah. I'm a Gallup certified strengths coach. So I'm kind of a Gallup nerd, and I read their research, and they have state of the American workplace the global workplace, globally they find it's like 13 to 15% of the workplace globally is actively engaged at work. I think it's around 33% in the US, which is somewhat alarming, but they find, there's those actively engaged employees, which is great. There's employees who are just engaged, and then there's actively disengaged, which they actually find it would be more profitable for employers to pay them not to come to work.
Yes.
But
there are companies that do that, by the way. There are companies that do that.
That pay them not to come to work?
Yes. Zappos is one of them.
Really?
Yeah.
Oh, not to come to work for them, right? Don't they give them or do they keep them on the payroll and just pay them not to come
No.
in?
It's just like, here's thousands of dollars to go kind of thing.
Wow. Amazing. Yeah. Well, because, those actively disengaged employees, and I've seen them, maybe I've been one of those people at a point in the past, can become toxic and kind of infect everyone. But one of the interesting things that from their research is that there's kind of three scenarios, right? There's one with what they call where the employees are getting strengths-based feedback, which is like, here's what you're doing well. Let's amplify that. And we build a team of sharp people rather than a team of well-rounded people, right? And everyone moves forward. Then you have the middle, which is worse, which is weaknesses-based, which a lot of people are familiar with. You get your performance review, and it's like 3 kind of milquetoast lines about, hey, great attitude, whatever. And then it's 5 paragraphs of everything you're doing wrong. And then the latter one is where managers just kind of ignore their employees. And I find it interesting that, the best, of course, is strengths-based feedback, where it's kind of positive reinforcement. Let's amplify your strengths. But the situation, the worst of those 3 actually isn't the weaknesses-based. It's the being ignored. And it's because and you touch on a lot of that in your book, which is not, so it's not surprising to see that in that, like if people are ignored, they just kind of go on and on and on. If they're getting weaknesses based, maybe they're just motivated to leave or they get I remember seeing some studies about in the Korean conflict, American POWs, they found that there was, as a percentage of physical to mental torture, there was actually very little physical torture in the POW camps in North Korea. But the death rate was actually very high because what they were doing was just kind of isolating the prisoners. They found that if they struck a prisoner or yelled at a prisoner, that would actually give the prisoner kind of a motivation to go like, I'm going to get out of here and come back.
Yes.
So I almost feel like there's some of that going on. If you have a boss you hate, it's almost like, I'm going to stick it to you. But if you get ignored, it's almost worse than getting no feedback at all. Does that surprise you?
Yeah. Well, no, it doesn't surprise me. One of the laws of my book is about, listening to your employees. There's really nothing more important we can do for somebody than to listen to them and to kind of be present for them. And that's just for people generally, right? We all want people to know our name. We want people to we want to be important and feel important to people around us. So what you're saying does not surprise me at all. If you're isolating someone and giving them no attention and not talking to them and not listening to them, and that would make sense. That would drive me bonkers.
When you go in, have you ever seen a situation, where a manager is just like, yeah, I listen to all my employees, and then you go maybe and meet with the employees, or you do a 360 or something like that and realize that is not the case?
Yes, absolutely. Yes. I have had people that have hired me before and have heard some of that feedback. So it's tough. The good thing is that at least most of them are folks that are willing to get better. And it's more about continuous improvement and less about perfection. Right?
Got it.
And that's really what everything I talk about and everything I write about is about. Every day, let's just get a teensy bit better. And I strive for that too. When my faults are put right in the front of my face, then I realize, I could have done that better. Okay, well, I'm going to learn, and next time I will not be doing that thing.
Yeah.
That's the key. Yeah.
Yeah, that's been the toughest thing for me to learn, rather than getting my back up. And I still do, but then I take it down and like, okay, let's learn from this.
Yes.
We're going to go through all the 7 laws, but off the top, are there any 1 or 2 laws that you find managers, they read it or they'll go through it and it's surprising to them?
Surprising. I don't think it's surprising, but it's like when they hear it, for example, the idea of transparency, being vulnerable, that one is one, it's a tough one for managers to do and to take. Because when we think about, that leader and that manager, it is a puffed up person, shoulders high, walking across the room, gliding through the space kind of idea, right? And so I think that they probably have the hardest time thinking about that. How can they meet their people where they're at? How can they reveal a piece of themselves without going too far, but giving their people exactly what it is they're looking for? Because their people are starving for that vulnerability, for the transparency into what's really happening. What I find is that organizational leaders tend to want to kind of defend, or what's the word? Defend might not be a right word, but kind of hide the truth from their people as if they are children and are not, right, don't have the thickness of skin to be able to take the truth. And so I'm not saying tell all the truth, because that's not something that I'm an advocate for. But I do believe in telling a huge amount of the truth, so that they can know what it is they can do to help in the situation, because then they feel helpless and out of control if they sense something, aren't aware of something, and then can't do anything about it.
Yeah. You said something that struck a chord, which is, I can't remember the exact words, but kind of went around treating people as adults versus children. And I always found, I've had some clients where you go in and there's 45 minutes and you're yelled at like you're a child. And, it creates a culture of fear, not transparency. People are afraid to say anything in that kind of environment. And I run across that a lot.
It's so unfortunate that exists. I know it exists, but it's unfortunate that it exists.
Yeah.
And it's, I love the work that I do, because in this space, I really talk a lot to leaders about things that are really around emotional intelligence. And so I'm certified in emotional intelligence. I'm certified in the disc structure for communication. And it's always so curious to me to see how people talk, how the leaders and managers of teams talk to their people. And then what it is, like that fear part of what the people are going to say back to them, like how can they defend themselves? And so, I don't know, trying to increase that awareness in the leaders about what their actions and inactions do to the people around them is a big part of the work that I do. I love to increase that awareness. And sometimes it's interesting to see the leader who, for example, they get feedback and we drill down on the feedback, let's say from a survey, and we see that maybe it's their area that needs the help. And they get this there's like this awakening of, oh, shoot, I did this. Or, and sometimes they don't quite know what to do.
Right.
After they realize they did this, they don't realize how to get themselves out of it. But it's so trying to work sometimes in that space too. I like to work with the clients that I start big with to go more narrow with them and help them uncover that a little bit more. So that's where some of the coaching comes in at.
The challenge you just described, it's so funny. You have 4 kids. I have 4 kids. It could be applied to parenting too, because that happens all the time. Wait, my wife will come in and say, you said this. And I'll be like, oh gosh, did I? Oh, all right. I got to go out and undo that.
Yes.
You just don't realize it until you take a step back. It's like, oh, okay. I see how they could have taken that.
But then the other day, on the other side of the coin, my second youngest son said to me, Mom, I think your book should be something like managers like you, because we like to be with you and we trust you. And this is what he's saying about me as his mother. And of course, if you watch any of my videos, most of them are about my kids and what I've learned from them in the leadership space. But when he came to me, and it surprised me for him to say that you listen to us and we know we're being heard when you're with you, and the book should be about like managers like you. And I thought, okay, I just wrote a book about it. Like, by the way, you haven't read my book. My book happens to be about that, babe. But it was just funny that he said that. So it's, you get the other side. You get the stuff where it's like, oops, I messed up. And you get that from them, right, really quickly. Right. And then you get the stuff of, I did this right. And they see it. And I impacted them. So it's kind of nice to get both sides.
How old are your kids again?
7, 10, 13, and 14.
13 and 14. And then you have boys, girls?
3 boys, and then the oldest is a girl.
3. Oh, okay. That's same with us. The oldest
Oh,
is a girl, and then we have three boys below that. So she's the princess.
yes. Yep, that's exactly right.
Yeah. I can't imagine having it the other way. So she rules the family. She lords over all. Yeah. Oh, well, so let's run through the 7 laws. The first one is give them great supportive man. And by the way, if anyone wants a great infographic of all 7 laws, I have them right up here on my computer. Go to Heather's LinkedIn page, and it's up there. It's wonderful. You can put it up in your workplace as a reminder of what you need to do to be a good manager, right?
Yes.
But law number 1 is give them great supportive managers. And how do you define a great and supportive?
Well, I mean, this is the biggest chapter of my book, so the definition is a long one. But I mean, overarchingly, it goes back to that emotional intelligence. It's the manager who may make mistakes. So there's no perfection in my book and in my world, but they are someone who has a high awareness that may have happened, and then they're willing to go back and apologize, to admit the mistake, and to go work on themselves and let their people know that they made the mistake and that they intend to work on themselves. It's the person who looks to empower their people, giving them choices, making them not feel out of control in their workspace. Those who are vulnerable and transparent, the stuff we talked about earlier, where it's okay not to be perfect around your people, and it's okay to need their help and to call on them. So it's that perfect manager really is someone who has a lot of those, people call them soft skills, but they're really hard skills to use in a consistent way. So yeah, that's it in a nutshell. But again, there's a lot of components to it inside the book, but I would say overarchingly, that's who that person is. And they know you. I mean, it's funny, when I thought about doing this book, it could be perceived that I'm doing it because I think I'm some perfect person, or that I was a perfect leader and I had no bumps in the road, and that would be the opposite of the truth. But one thing I can say, when I think about the strengths that we all have, going back to the Strengths Finders thing, is I'm a high on relator. I'm high on empathy. And those 2 things are the things that make me an amazing manager, because I sit and I care and I pay attention and I listen and I take the time. And when you look at my reviews and you look at the things that people have said about me, even to this day, that's the thing. Oh my gosh, you're the perfect person to write it. So again, not perfect, because I have some stories where I wasn't so perfect. I do. But in this space, it tends to be my strength. And so I felt like that was a big driver. Someone who was stronger in the area had to help those who was weaker.
Got it. Excellent. Now, the second law is recognize your employees often. And I can't remember which one of his books, but Tom Rath, who writes, he wrote StrengthsFinder 2.0. In one of his books, he talks
I have it on my shelf over there.
He talks about employee recognition and how some managers will see this, and so they'll institute something that is just kind of a meaningless Employee of the Month award. And so it becomes this thing where, well, Jane didn't get it yet, so now I got to give it to Jane. And so it has the opposite of the intended effect, where it becomes kind of a meaningless type of award or recognition. So when you recognize your employees often, how can managers avoid that trap of just creating something that turns into meaningless and is just kind of,
Fluff.
Yeah, exactly. I couldn't think of the right word, but fluff is perfect. Yeah.
Well, so in my book, I talk about this idea of crowdsourcing employee recognition. So it's a lot of pressure on the manager to have to do it all, but their recognition is the most important. So the manager showing the level of appreciation to their people is the most important, but it shouldn't be the only thing that a workplace has. So people love to be recognized by their coworkers. They want to know that the people around them on their team appreciate the work they do for the team. There's also customer appreciation. Putting in a process so that and customers can actually show appreciation towards the people, your coworkers, basically the team members. So if they're getting like little boosts of that dopamine, I call it kind of that shot, that dopamine shot. If they're getting those boosts by different places, then the pressure comes off a little bit for the manager. But I wish for the manager, again, this is not about like balloons and parties and like plaques, and it doesn't have to be that. Some people really love that. There are a small percentage of people, I have to say, I'm one of them, who likes that. when we look at it on the DISC spectrum, there's like this high I who loves recognition. They love giving it, love receiving it. They like any certificate. You can give them a ribbon. They absolutely love it. But most people, by the way, are not those people. They just want you to go by and you can either go by and see them in the office, you can send them an email, but it's just saying, thank you, or nice job. Being specific with the recognition, is key. Those things that you see that are organizational level, those employee of the month things, those are great if they're done well. But I agree with you. I would not make that the foundation of my recognition program for employees. Managers have to really be, very cognizant of the role they play in all of that.
And that, you talk about the balloons and the parties, and I've known, and I think everyone has known managers who do that. And they think, well, we're having a great party. That's going to compensate for the fact that for the next 30 days, I'm not going to do all these I can ignore the other 6 laws, right? But we're going to throw a party, and that'll make up for it.
No. And actually, there's a stat that says that if employees have not been recognized within 7 days, they feel like they've never been recognized. It's as if it never happened a month ago if you wait that long.
Wow. Law number 3 is give them a voice.
Sorry to go on hiatus.
No.
That's the home office thing. So giving them a voice. This is a really big one. And I always ask people, what is your listening strategy? Most organizations say, okay, I'm going to do a survey. And okay, now I've done a survey, so I've listened. And listening has much more to do with action than it does with just being like passive about it. So having a strategy for what you do to roll out the listening device, whether it's doing focus groups, whether it's doing a survey, letting the employees know what it is and what it means to them and what you intend to do with it. And then when you actually roll it out, then it's after you've done it, and kind of pretty quickly, like within 2 weeks, making sure that you communicate with them on what it is you've seen at a high level, but again, what you're going to do about it. It's a tedious process to listen. So there's the manager who's listening, obviously at the one-on-one that they have with their team members. Hopefully they're having those weekly or every other week. What they're doing with their team members in a group and listening in that way and kind of making open forums. And then there's above organization and what they plan to do as an organization to listen. And so it's making sure you have kind of all of those things in a row and figuring out what you're doing along the way tactically to inform the people who actually took the time to do the survey about what your process is, what you plan on doing with the information, how everything's going to roll out. And then what I love to do to go further is once you've done those type of things, involve the employees in the change that they're seeking. And so having them see some of the data, maybe not every little detail, but having them see some of it and then be able to be a part of what improvements need to be made based upon what it is they heard. And then let the employees then be the champions for the fact that the organization is listening and the organization is acting. So it's a process. It can feel tedious. It can even feel a little mechanical sometimes. But what I found is that if organizations follow the process, the people feel good. And that's what this is all about, is having the people feel good.
And like you said, it has to be ongoing. It has to be shortly, or the time period has to be, you can't wait 30 days or 6 months or a year, as some people wait till their Christmas party to pat them on the back about something that happened in the first week of January, right?
Yep. I
had a client, when you talk about feedback, and they had some issues on their team. And so what the head of the team had a coach come in and do 360, meet with everyone on the team and said, this is anonymous. No one's going to know your responses. Now, no one on the team believed it. Went through, and there was a good number of team members who were brutally honest about the manager, about, morale, etc. They then had their team retreat. The manager was there. They were all around a table. And the coach gets up and says, okay, thank you. I interviewed everyone. We're going to go through everyone's responses now. Who wants to start? And no one spoke up, of course. So she started writing people's responses on the thing. And what it turned into was the manager broke down and basically started shouting at everyone, you don't know how tough this job is. Give them a voice, find out what they want. But if you haven't done these other things to create when you treat people like children, when you don't build transparency and trust, you don't do these things all over, half the team did not trust enough to actually give their real responses. And afterwards they were like, see, I told you that's why I didn't give a real response. And the other half were like, oh my gosh, I just got called on the carpet.
Yeah.
Shortly thereafter, half the team either quit or was fired. And
yeah, that was bad. That was a bad example to execute. Thanks for bringing that up. Bad example.
Yeah.
It does need to be confidential. There cannot be repercussions for the responses. If the organization and the manager is seeking to really improve, to increase engagement numbers, to increase, the loyalty, to reduce turnover numbers, whatever their end goals are, because that's part of the strategy, listening strategy. You have to know why you're listening. What are you trying to get to? And so if you haven't uncovered that, don't even go down the road. Don't do it just because everybody else is doing it. Do it because you know why, and really do it for the right reasons.
Yeah, don't do it to find out who the bad apples are so you can fire them. Right? That doesn't work.
Yeah, no. Oh gosh. Oh, that just, by the way, a hair just stood up in my arms in a bad way.
Yeah. It happens. It's crazy. Law number 4, which I love as a strengths coach, grow and promote their talent.
Yes. Well, it's interesting. As soon as I think of this one, I think of what people say about millennials in the workplace. Because millennials are ones who feel like if they're not moving every few months, like they need to be moving, growing, changing, evolving in a place where they're able to innovate. And if you don't have them in a place like that, they are like, they just feel like they're in a useless place. So I think of that. But having said that, I kind of felt like, maybe not months, but if it was like, a year gone by and I'm doing the same thing and I haven't grown and I'm not stretching myself, then I wasn't feeling fulfilled. And I was wondering where my next move was, to be honest. And so I think a lot of people are that way, growing and promoting their talents. Again, the idea behind this book is about loyalty. So how do we keep the people longer? They may not be there for 30 years, like it used to be when there's pensions and things like that, right?
Right.
But if you want to keep them longer and you want them to be more engaged in the work they're doing while you have them, how do you do that? So that's really the premise behind this. But so I think in the end, it's, doing the things like having talent mobility, letting them job shadow, letting them check out, what's happening in the current place. They don't have to go elsewhere. I know people who have been at a place for 20 years, but it's because they were in 10 different jobs. So, right. It always seemed like they were in a different space and it kept them interested longer. And so trying to set up, processes and systems to allow people to do that. Talent mobility is a big one, letting them check out and kind of, let's see what's behind the curtains here in this area. And maybe finance is a place for me. I think those are just, again, being innovative is the way to go for organizations in that space.
It's interesting because you bring up millennials and the importance of doing that. And they want to be innovative. They want to be able to grow with the company. It's interesting because, you mentioned that wasn't always the case. And, it's like, well, my dad told me you just got to who cares if you're happy? You just got to put your head down and go till you retire and get that pension, take care of your family. It would be interesting to find out 30 years ago if the same laws still applied or if they were just kind of like repressed. Like no one wanted to admit that that's what they really wanted. Don't dare speak of that. And now there's such a culture shift that you have to do that. You have to engage transparency with your employees, where 40 years ago it was like, forget it.
Well, and that's why I call this intuitive. And when I speak to HR or speak to anybody, I said, this is not new. I mean, I may say it a different way. I may line it up a different way, right? It's not new, but someone has to keep saying it and saying it in a way, hopefully that's compelling enough for people to listen. So, you could write 25 books with these same laws and say a different way, and it still needs to be said.
Yeah.
Right. Even though it's really just basic and foundational, because a lot of people just aren't doing it. So it's not common practice in workplaces. And until it's common practice, I'll continue to write things and talk about things on these topics,
It's interesting because, like you said, there's certain things that are intuitive, but in culture, they're not openly accepted anymore like they were. I was thinking, there's the Me Too movement and sexual harassment, and that's obviously been taken in the spotlight over the last 6 months or so. But I was talking to my mom about it and she said, oh my gosh, in the 60s, she said, you know how rampant it was? And I would threaten and they would laugh and I would say, I'm going to come over there and I'm going to kick you. And what? And they would laugh and walk away. And she's like, it happened. We knew it was wrong, but it wasn't culturally acceptable to speak out and say it was wrong. Mm-hmm. So I guess that plays into this, that these still applied 40 years ago, these intuitive laws. Mm-hmm. It's just that people didn't accept them yet openly, I guess.
Yes. And people are still afraid. People are still very afraid, right? So people are just not talking up, speaking up. And like you said, if there's a repercussion for actually speaking up, and they are, even if there isn't, even people trust me naturally, and I would be the one like administering these long surveys and saying, listen, we have a outside party doing this. I don't know who it is that's completing it. And they would still be like, no, not quite sure if I was, because you're part of the corporation, and so
Right.
still a lot of that going on, and it's really up to leaders to help, lessen that over time. But this is going to be ongoing. This is going to be forever. It's just, can we change just one or two leaders every single time, you and I in this world, right? Can we just,
yeah. And what you mentioned is like, if you have 5 years of fostering a distrust, a culture of distrust, then of course they're not going to trust anything. If you have 360 interviews where they're not anonymous when you're told they're anonymous, then who's going to trust anything going forward? Law number 5, which plays into what we just talked about, foster deep connections with your employees. And I guess everything we've talked to at this point, we've talked about a lot of horror stories of people who did the exact opposite.
Yep.
But what is the kind of the turning point at which, deep connections versus too deep? You talked about being too transparent versus being the right amount of transparent.
When I refer to connections there, I'm referring to connections to their leaders, connections to their managers, connections to their coworkers. So it's through the connection. I mean, you and I are in a group together where it's true connection that brings us there and keeps us there, right? And so people are in a search for that. And even though they're moving away from the 30-year career type thing in one place, when they're at a place, they want to have that connection. They want to know the leaders who are responsible to lead the organization in a positive direction for the benefit of all. They want to know their manager who's supposed to lead their team in the positive direction, for all. And they want to know their coworkers. They want to, there was some stats back when, I'm not sure if it's still true, I haven't looked, but Gallup actually said that people want to have friends at work. They want to know when they go there's a place to go. There's someone that's missing them when they don't go. And so having those deep connections is what I'm talking about with loyalty. If an organization can create workspaces that could promote collaboration and more teamwork and more connections, and they can do those same things with leaders, where leaders are engaging more, the executive leaders are engaging more with the troops, people at the front line who are seeing what customers need and want. The more that they can have their mission and their vision lived out, and people are accountable to live those out in a way, and they're connected in their heart to those things. Those are the things that when I'm talking about connection, I'm talking about those
types of connections.
Yeah.
And even like you said, I look at LinkedIn, and over the past, I've been on LinkedIn since, I don't know, 2003, 2004. I don't know, since it started, but I wasn't active. I just kind of I was on it. I shared stuff. I check it once every 2 weeks. And since October, been engaging more. And so the group we're in, there's some other groups I'm in, and it's turned into, as someone like you who works in a home office, sometimes you can feel like you're on an island.
Mm-hmm,
and it feels like, I love my kids, love my wife, love that. But like you said, those connections, and it's almost like a support network of, can I bounce something off of you? Am I doing this right? Did I do this wrong? It's easy to be on an island, even if you're working in a workplace with 100 people around you, right? If you don't have those connections.
Absolutely. Yes. And trust is a big part of the connections. But so like you said before, you don't build up trust for 5 years, and then you go do a 360 and you expect everybody to trust that that's going to be confidential. All of that takes time. That's earned, and so when we talk about these things of connections, it doesn't just happen. It's like you just set up the environment and then, let them go to it and that's done. I mean, there's a lot of curating that goes into this.
Sure.
And all the things that we talk about. Yeah. It has to be purposeful. It has to be done purposefully.
Law number 6, make teamwork the focus.
Some of it ties back to the connection part, but this is more about, I don't know if you've seen those organizations where there's like the top performers, and everything's about those top guys and gals, but it's not about what's best for the team, what's in big team, like organizational team. So I love to see, we do this thing. There's one group I work with. It's a focus group, and we branded the group so that the whole team would feel, uniquely tied to the mission of what we're doing to try to improve the culture for the organization through their voices.
Sure.
And whenever organizations can do that, create cross collaboration, create team recognition, everything where we're really focusing and highlighting the team and how there's so much more innovation and creativity that can come from working together. When you do that, again, those people feel tied to the groups within the organizations. When you create those collaborative environments, they feel like, I want to stay because I know I have a level of importance in this group, and my voice has led to lots of great improvements. So that's one of the reasons why they would do that. And then that last law, that pay them equitably, has pay is important. It's number 7 on the list. It's not the most important. All of the research out there shows that people want to be paid, obviously, fair and equitably, but it's more important to have the first 6 laws in place before you really put a lot of time into the compensation side. People need to pay their bills. They have to be able to eat, and that's important, but it's not the most important. I also highlight in that chapter the idea of being able to, have flexibility, work-life integration, doing more things where you bring family to the work environment sometimes, where there's daycares, just anything that you can do to make it easier for people to live and work in the space you want them to be at,
Yeah.
So that's really what that law is about.
Yeah. Awesome. Yeah. And I know a lot of moms who they're allowed to work from home 1 day a week, things like that. Again, horror stories. I've had 2 people tell me in the past 2 weeks where one had her son who was in a debilitating accident and was at the hospital. She had to rush to the hospital. And then someone else whose dad had a heart issue and she had to rush to the hospital. In both cases, their employer called them and they opened it up and said, well, my manager's going to say, is everything okay? Anything we can do? Now, the first question was, how long do you think you'll be out? When are you going to be back in the office? We really need you here. And that was in two days in a row that happened. And so when you talk about, the opposite, the 7 laws not to follow, I think that's in there. But like you said, that even if the pay is great, things like that are going to, and actually for both these people, the pay was great. But like you said, pay is number 7 if those other 6 aren't working right.
Yes. It's like, you don't care about me. I'm not important. You didn't listen when I told you that this was, important, or I need to go do this thing. And those are the things, and they cost nothing. It costs nothing. That's kind of the big point here. It's so expensive, and employees are just this. I mean, I get, obviously it's expensive. Like, you have to pay them, you have to give them compensation, you have to give them benefits and perks and things. But in the end, you keep them by the things that don't cost a thing.
So, thanks for going through the 7 laws. One thing, on a personal note, you have a law degree, but it's been a while since you were what most people would say is a practicing lawyer. Mm-hmm. So can you tell us a little bit about your journey from law school to being a facilitator, consultant, and an author?
Wow. I'm going to go fast. I can talk fast too. So I actually loved studying law. So I loved law school. I didn't like the practice of law because I didn't like all of the desk work and the research and things like that I had to do. I'm just much more of a people person. I did very well in the practice when it came to like bringing clients in. I could go and meet with somebody and schmooze with somebody, right? They would trust me and I could bring them as a client really easily. But I got out of that, and funny enough, I left that to work for Mary Kay Cosmetics. And so I left the practice of law to tote cosmetics. I mean, really, it's to think about when I say it, even this many years later. I know it sounds crazy to people, but it was the best thing I did for myself. So I was there for about 4.5 years, and I became a director and had a car and had a team of people. And they taught me a lot about communication and about, again, how to, caring for people and motivating people and inspiring people. So I did that for a while, and then left that and worked with my husband in a mortgage company that we had for a while there. And I was leading the sales effort. And, that whole idea of knowing people, communicating, building trust was all just something that just continued to follow me along the way. It was this kind of the foundation or the cornerstone of everything I did. So I just kind of did that and did a lot of different roles that were kind of large strategic accounts, large account management, where I had to keep customers, keep them happy. So that loyalty thing started to come out. And then I moved into the customer experience space, where I was responsible to do surveys and go out to see customers and things like that. So those are things that kind of evolved over time. And then what happened is I worked for a company that was going through a big merger. It was 5 companies coming together. And I was overseeing the client-facing team, But during the merger, the culture started to really go downhill. And no one was paying attention to the people and what was happening. There was so much mistrust that was happening between people. And so I went to the head of HR and I said, listen, we have got to do something about it. I mean, no one trusts anybody. And she said, you are right. We need to do something about that. You go do that. And I was like, what? Okay. I lead customer experience. I lead all the customer facing people, like external. Why? You're at HR. You should be doing this. And she said, no, you're perfect for this. You're the one who's always recognizing people and you're the one who's always doing all these things. And so I said, okay, I'll go do that. So I created this employee engagement council with a group of employees. And it was like probably within a month, it was almost a meeting. Number one, everybody on the council they were completely enthused. So then they were going out and they were thinking all these creative ways that we could bring people together and kind of elevate the culture that had really just gone downhill. So did that. But, the layoff, there's a layoff that was inevitable at this point, and they laid off like 200 people. I was one of them.
Wow.
I knew it was bad when the CEO was gone and the head of sales was gone. But it wasn't a bad thing. I mean, it was kind of an ouchie at the time, but it was actually a good thing because it helps me realize where my passion was. I already had been that voice of the external customer for a long time and voice for internal employees because I'd always been that person people came to. But it made me realize this is what my calling was. So awesome. That's why I've been most of my time in this space, but also in the voice space, listening. How do we listen more effectively to the people that drive the bus? Because they really do drive the bus. It's not the leaders, it's the people at the front line who make that impact, right? I mean, we think about that.
Right.
So that's where I'm at.
Awesome. So if people want to connect with you online and more importantly, get the book, where should they go?
Well, the book is actually on Amazon, so it's pretty easy to find. If you put either Heather Younger in there or the 7 Intuitive Laws of Employee Loyalty, you will get right to it. I have an author page there that you can check out, and it has some of my articles that I put on my blog that just kind of populate in there. I'm on LinkedIn pretty actively, so I would say that you can connect with me. Heather Younger, Heather R. Younger, I think might be the initials, but when you put that in there, I'm sure I'll pop up somewhere in there. And then if you had any questions for me or something, you can always email me at heather@customerfanatics.com. And that customer fanatics ends with an IX. People always think it's like a regular fanatic, but it's an IX. And I'm sure Kurt's you're gonna put that somewhere in your show notes.
The links will be in the show notes for everyone.
Awesome.
So we'll make that easy. So,
awesome.
Well, Heather, thank you so much for being on the podcast. It's been a pleasure.
Thank you. This has been wonderful. I always love talking about this. I geek out on this stuff.
And if please, everyone go to Amazon, get the book, contact Heather if you have any questions, and we'll talk to you soon.
Thank you.
Thank you.